Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I am Jessamyn Neuhaus. I'm a full-time, until June 1st, I'm a full-time professor of history and popular culture and the part-time interim director of the Center for Teaching Excellence at SUNY Plattsburgh. Starting June 1st, I will be the full-time director and also teaching a class a year. Really want to welcome you. I know it's been a very long and very tiring semester, so I really appreciate your presence. And we're a small enough group today. It would be great if we could just go around and say our names and what discipline, what field, what department we teach in. So I will pass the ball first to Murat.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Murat. I am a professor of history specializing on early modern borderlands.
Murat, you want to pass the ball?
Yes, I'll pass it to Paul.
My button wasn't working. I'm Paul Tomaszczak. I'm, like John said, in the dean's office, but I'm also a geologist, so I occasionally get to do things with rocks.
Welcome, Paul.
Who's next?
You pass.
Oh, Sean.
Hi, I'm Sean. I teach some general studies courses through the Excel office. I primarily coordinate Focus Forward, which is a mentoring program. I also work as an adjunct in the English department.
Welcome, Sean.
Thank you. I will pass to Kristen.
Good morning. I'm Kristen Coyle. I'm the Dean for Liberal Arts and Sciences, and I'm a psychologist. Emily?
Hi, I am also a psychologist. I'm an associate professor in the psychology department, and I have a mixed background of clinical and biopsychology. And I will pass it to Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer Fogel, an associate professor in our broadcasting and mass communication program. And I'll pass it to John and whoever's in the room with you.
Okay.
Hi, John Kane, I'm professor of economics and a keyboard player in the Guy Young band. Oh, I'm the director of CELT here. And I'll pass it to Maggie.
Hi, I'm Maggie. I'm an assistant professor of criminal justice, and I serve as the associate director of CELT, and I will pass it to Caitlin.
Hi, again, I'm Caitlin Barber. I'm a professor in meteorology, and I guess my expertise is turbulence for aviation operations.
Well, I'm so glad to be with you today talking about one of my favorite parts of teaching, the unessay, near and dear to my heart. These are our goals for today. We'll get a working definition of unessays. We're going to identify some ways it can increase inclusion and engagement. And I've left plenty of time for us to brainstorm ways that you can use unessays in your classes to assess student learning. So we'll start just with 3 minutes of reflection. What kinds of things are not working as well as you would like? Maybe fine, but not quite as well as you would like with your current assessments. And what do you hope to learn today about using unessays in your classes to assess student learning? And I will set the timer for 3 minutes. You can just note to yourself if you'd like to put it in the chat, you can do that as well, whichever. Thank you, everybody. That was 3 minutes. We have a couple minutes if someone would like to share what's something you would like to learn today about using on essays. You can just unmute yourself.
And then on a constant search for student work that is more obviously authentic to them. And also, you know, legitimately authentic, but
Right.
also apparent to the student that this is something that is some type of task that they can see themselves doing in the future, that they could talk about, that I can do this to an employer.
Great. Thank you so much. Anyone else like to share a learning goal? Murat.
Yeah, I teach writing intensive history classes, of course, and I use essays a lot in my courses, especially in terms of midterms, final exams, etc. But I spend a lot of time fixing people's writing and providing feedback on writing itself rather than the content most of the time. Perhaps I thought an essay, and I am not really aware of what it includes, will be a helpful mechanism or another thing for me to think about assigning different types of writing, different types of essays.
Thank you so much. I love both those answers and how they touch on a range of things that I do think that on essays can help us with. So thank you for sharing those. So first, we will start with a definition, working definition. And as I have here on the slide, an essay is an assignment that gives students the opportunity to demonstrate learning and increase skills. And it's using any format at all, any format they choose, except traditional written papers or exams. I also include in the definition that the essay is most effective when it is offered as an additional option to the traditional essays that Murat just mentioned. And when it is very, very clearly explained and structured, including how it will be assessed and graded. And that's an important caveat for our student populations, which Oswego and Plattsburgh have very similar student populations in many ways. So for our students, the structure, explanation, clarity, including how it's going to be assessed, is an important part of using essays successfully. So more on the transparency for effective use of essays. They're most useful for authentic learning and also for our own assessment of student learning when we can link them very, very clearly to the learning outcomes. And I'm not a learning outcomes hard ass, like it's got to be this way and you've got to link to this, but the goals, like what do you want students to be able to do better at the end of the class than they could do at the beginning of the class? And that's not a secret in your mind, but shared with the students. What are students learning how to do better in your class better than they could at the beginning of the class? So when you use the essays, one of the ways we make them really transparent and useful for students is to link them to those learning outcomes and link them to the student gains in skills and understanding. Or like Murat very succinctly put it, the content, the content of the class and the skills, how students will be using your content to do things. A good essay assignment usually includes an explanatory or reflective component to help students do that identifying as well. So it's not just you standing on the outside saying, look how this improved your skills, but students identifying for themselves how the essay increased their skills and abilities. And Kristen, to your point about authentic learning, what did they learn? So the structure, very, very important and somewhat counterintuitively, maybe especially high achieving students will be nervous and may resist the essay. I think many of us have started to hear that structure is really important for inclusivity And for student success kind of across the board, maybe students who are facing particular obstacles. But I would add that when it comes to the unessay, very, very high achieving and academically proficient students also need a lot of structure and clarity, because it will be unfamiliar to them and they will be nervous about something that they have not had a lot of practice with. So our high achieving students have gotten really, really good at school. You throw in an essay, that might be something they haven't done before. So a lot of planning, a lot of structure, including grading. It's not a requirement, but one thing I've had good luck with is collaborating with students to decide how their essay will be assessed. You have to give up some of your most precious real estate, and that's the in-class meetings for when in-person classes. You have to give up some of that precious real estate for discussion, questions and answers. And if possible, it depends on your class size, but if your class is small enough, to schedule some individual meetings or small group meetings with students to go over the requirements, maybe check in on their progress. Examples are awesome. I would recommend asking students who've done them before, good ones in the past, if you can share them. And even in marketing, I think it's marketing, the term dog fooding, doing the assignment yourself. It's a good practice for anything you're asking students to do, but for the unessay, if you've never done it before and you need an example, do one yourself and provide it as an example to students. My students love examples because it's hard to picture something. It's hard to picture where you're going, what's at the end of the road if you've never been down that road before. I also really urge you to keep in mind that explaining and talking with students about how the unessay is going to help them demonstrate their learning is really vital. Everybody, it's not just students, everybody's looking for ways to avoid wasting their time, our precious time, and even more so, our precious cognitive resources, which are really depleted now. So be ready to clarify that and ask them to reflect on it as well. That transparency aspect, some additional resources, not on the unessay specifically, but transparency overall are available at Tilt. If you haven't checked it out before, transparency in teaching and learning, a lot of good ideas and resources there for making everything we do as transparent as possible. So some unessay examples. These are from the work other people have done and a couple from my own. Podcast, board game, a story, song, or artwork, TikTok video, an annotated family recipe. That was one of my favorites from a couple of years ago. You want to, if possible, include some aspect of a gallery walk where students can show off or share their essays. Other students will be interested. You could even include some kind of like a short, low stakes reflective assignment where students identify other essays that they found really compelling or something like that to reflect on and add a little weight to this assignment. You could do presentations as well. I haven't done those like a formal presentation, but you could. So just some examples. These are ones from the last time I taught the US History Survey, which is the intro history class. And I taught it through the lens of the American promise, the promise of equality and justice for all, in ways we fell short, and ways we made progress towards achieving the American promise. And I asked students to do an essay identifying ways that the American promise has played a role in their own unique individual life. So you can see here, one student did a board game, one student looked at the workplace issues and compared some, I think it was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire with their working conditions, noting the progress. These were some more artistic examples. A student who had trained as a baker did these frosted cookies connecting a protest from the 1930s to protests, more recent ones around the environment. And one student did an artistic painting of her own heritage and experiences. Shared by permission, I should note. These are from my friend and colleagues, Kate Denial has been using the essay for a long time. She's also a historian, and these are some examples from her students' essays. So one big bonus I do want to point out here before we look at some of the more structured and logistical aspects. I don't know if anybody was secretly thinking this when we did, what do you want to learn? But grading is hard work. And anything we can do to help mitigate some of our own exhaustion and grading labor is not only just beneficial to our own well-being, but it also improves our assessment abilities. So what I mean by that is when I've got a big stack of traditional essays and I haven't scaffolded it very well, and some of them are pretty bad, that's very draining. And I start to just, I'm sort of on autopilot. Am I really giving good feedback? Am I really providing students with enough formative assessments and feedback to improve their work going forward? Just speaking for myself, no, not really. I start to, the life gets sucked out of me. For the essays, because they help me connect more directly with students, their unique and individual abilities, I just am able to offer more consistently excellent feedback. They are more fun to grade. And that in turn gives me more energy and ability to give students really better and more meaningful feedback. So for some additional ideas and readings, you can go to my website, geekypedagogy.com. And in the sample assignments page are a couple of the essays that I've used in the past, and also these links to work other scholars have done on the essay. And I would say it's a range of disciplines as well here represented here, not just history. Okay, so we're going to take 5 minutes now to do some brainstorming before we look at some ways that the essay can increase inclusivity. What different types of essays interest you and could be adapted to your course content, including keeping in mind course size, course requirements, departmental culture, all those things, your own embodied identity. How could they maybe be adapted to your course content and could engage your students? So we'll do 5 minutes for brainstorming. And again, it's fine to do it to yourself, just making notes for yourself or put them in the chat, whichever you like.
Like quizzing Dan about what birds are which. Right.
Thanks, everybody. That was 15 minutes, and there were some good examples too shared in the chat. So let's go on and look at some ways that essays can increase engagement and inclusion. Engagement has become even more of a buzzword and issue right now. A lot of people reporting some declining engagement in the pandemic / kind of post-pandemic / new wave of pandemic. So some general principles we can keep in mind is that learning is very hard. This is true for everybody, and everybody's brain is very smart in allocating time and energy. And if we do not care about something, our brains want to protect us and protect their resources and tend to not engage as well. Not see the value of it really gets in the way of learning. Have to care about something in order to learn how to do it and to do it well. So one way that the essay as an option can increase that engagement and learning is by empowering students to take the step of choosing a format that is of interest to them and engages some of that intrinsic motivation and adds value to the content and the skills that you're trying to help them learn. If they can demonstrate their learning in a way that really matters to them, their ability to demonstrate their learning goes up. What that means for inclusion is that it increases opportunity for student success by offering a variety of on-ramps. Different ways for students to demonstrate their knowledge is well in keeping with universal design for learning principles. For our students who generally, not all, but generally arrive to us pretty passive and disempowered as learners, as agents in the academic setting, offering the on-essay option does empower them as knowledge creators. And one way that I've explained to students why the on-essay is effective is that when you have to rethink something that you're familiar with by demonstrating it in a new way, that improves your thinking and understanding of the content. So if you understand a concept very well and you could barf up a research paper on it without much effort, but have you really increased your understanding? If you have to rethink, this is how I'm going to show my knowledge in a way I've never demonstrated my knowledge before, that can really increase your understanding. It also is a way to support diversity in your classroom because it begins with the assumption that different interests and experiences is a valuable asset, is an educational asset, not a deficit. That's just, for example, if a student has lower writing skills, but is a very accomplished artist, the on-essay option is a way of really foregrounding this is an asset to the way we learn, these varieties of, as a learning community, these varieties of experiences. And the whole class can benefit, remember that gallery walk, the whole class can benefit from seeing the learning, the content, the skills demonstrated in different ways. So it expands that learning. And finally, one thing I've heard repeatedly from people, and I found true as well, that it really built connection between you and your students and other students by framing as an important aspect of our class community, people's individual experiences and perspectives. So before we go into the main brainstorming section, I just want to pause here for questions or comments about any aspect of what we've covered so far. And we're small enough group, you can just unmute.
So I did want to share something that a student did in my class that was completely unprompted that I think would probably fit as an unessay. So I gave students lots of flexibility with their presentations in a small seminar class. And so some opted to do them online, some opted to do them in person, but this student included in his presentation, so the class was on neurodiversity. He himself identified as autistic. And part of his presentation was he interviewed a friend of his who also was neurodiverse, and just included that, 2-minute clip in his presentation, and just the questions that were asked reflected that he understood and was reflecting on the course content. And I just thought that was so creative and completely on his own. But so that would fall kind of under an unessay, right? Something like that. Yeah, okay.
Definitely, very much so. Like you said, spontaneous and not kind of structured into the class, but certainly it's a great example of how something that is not a traditional exam or paper written work, it demonstrates achievement of learning and understanding. Mm-hmm. So like to build on that, maybe a more flippant example, you say, well, a student makes a meme. How can that be even comparable to anything we do in exam? Or because it can demonstrate solid understanding of concepts, ideas, skills. So yeah, that's a great example. And I like the grounding there of the student's empowerment as a learner, demonstrating agency over his actions and abilities in the class. Thank you, Emily. And I'm going to call on John to mention an important point here we haven't touched on yet, which is your workload. And you want to be cautious if you take up the mantle of unessays and go charging into your class, that you don't create an undoable workload for yourself. John, please tell us about your podcast experiences.
Well, actually, I have a couple. One was I first started doing something similar to this when students had trouble with weekly exams. I gave them in my large class with up to 400 students. I gave them the option of creating videos on the concepts that were covered there as an alternative, and that would replace the exam and so forth. But I let them do that all the way through the semester. And then the last time I did it, I had 120 videos come in during the last week and during finals week of the course. And they were 5 to 15 minute videos, and that took a lot of time. With a podcast assignment, I originally in a class of, I think it was about 50 or so online, 45, 50, somewhere in that range, I let them do podcasts, and I encouraged them to form groups of 2 or 3 for that. Most of them, because it was online the very first time, did it themselves. And they ended up with podcasts that I asked them to do 5 to 10 minute podcasts, but they were quite a bit longer. So the next time I had them do that, the next semester, I required them, unless they had some compelling reason, such as, workload issues or other things where they weren't able to work with others, to work with at least one other person. And I thought that would cut it down, but they ended up being really long. I had some podcasts that were close to an hour. And it was partly because this was during a pandemic and they were just really happy to talk with each other. And so they had these really good conversations, but it did add a bit to the amount of time it took to grade them.
Yeah, so I'm very cognizant of never recommending, suggesting anything about teaching that's going to add to your stress and your potential burnout. So thinking about how to use unessays, going into the next section when we're brainstorming some actual possibilities, definitely considering your workload, how to maybe structure it in ways that don't add to your own stress and possible burnout. I guess one thing I'd flag is that when I do on essays, I scaffold it so students have to do like a project proposal before the actual essay. So some of, as an ungraded but required proposal. So some of the work doesn't pile up at the end with feedback and stuff. So some early preliminary work, making sure that by the time I get to the end of the semester and I'm doing the summative assessment, I'm not overwhelmed with, wow, this really went wrong. So I'm going to have to give a whole bunch of feedback. Hopefully I've caught it with the proposals. And you could do something else. So you could do something similar, a large class kind of spacing out maybe, or something like that. Okay, so I would like to reflect and discuss together, first individually and then together as a group. If you could go back to your initial reflections and think about inclusion now, how might the things you're thinking about doing with the unessay or things that interest you about the unessay increase inclusivity and frame educational learner variability as an educational asset? So let me give you 3 minutes for that, and then we'll discuss as a group. Okay, that was 3 minutes, and let's just open it up now for discussion. What kinds of ideas are you having about using the unessay? Maybe your trepidation or things that sound really cool that you want to try out. let's just open it up for discussion, maybe thinking especially about that authentic student learning and inclusion.
One issue I'd like to make about inclusion is that when we're teaching remotely or in any sort of format, students often are using their mobile devices, and mobile devices tend to be really poor for writing essays, but they're really good for recording short videos. So that's one way in which on essays can create a more inclusive environment.
Yeah, that's a great point, John.
I know for my senior seminar class, the kind of typical assignment is a term paper, and it is a 4,000 word paper, and it's a really intimidating project for students. And it's gone okay, but I really like the idea of having an on essay, because I think students who get that kind of anxiety, even if they can do the work, that there's a lot of I think apprehension to big writing assignments, and to have options for students, I think makes it perhaps a bit more manageable. I do think I could see some adjustment you had mentioned before. Some of the higher achieving students get a bit anxious about doing something with less clear guidance. But I think, not that there wouldn't be clear guidance with this, but
I know what you mean. Something new.
Yeah, without like a kind of specific something new. And so I was thinking like how one of it was actually the pandemic semester in spring 2020, right before we left. We did a sort of, kind of accidental an essay project where instead of students kind of reflecting on, particular theory in like a low stakes writing, I had them do videos and they acted out different skits. And so I could certainly see something like, an SNL style skit where, students are demonstrating, concepts from class into that. And I think what I really like about this, you had mentioned before, is that it gives students different avenues to demonstrate their learning. But it might hopefully, also reduce some of the anxiety around, big term assignments.
Yes. Yes. And if you included the reflective component as well and offered them some prompts, you could include a prompt like, how did lesson anxiety help you demonstrate your learning, or something about that?
Yeah.
So have students identify as well for themselves, when this reduced my anxiety about XYZ, I was actually able to demonstrate my learning better. Thank you.
I was thinking in terms of science, you write a lab report, you write a research paper for publication, but the issue in science right now is that communication to the broader audience. And so I think this is an avenue where you take your results and your data and you can be creative with it. And we do have some students that, yes, writing is not their strong suit. So being able to put their results, maybe a graphical abstract or a video abstract or something like that would be really helpful. So I'm going to maybe try that in one of my more writing intensive science classes. So
yeah, that's a great point as one of those options. And also going to some of that anxiety. I know the STEM evokes a lot of anxiety in a lot of students. So that might be one way to mitigate that as well. Thank you.
So I might have done a similar assignment without knowing what I was doing this semester. I was looking at AHA, American Historical Association's website, and I noticed an assignment type called Teach Your Family or Friends. So basically the idea is that students pick a topic from the content of the course and prepare a lecture and teach it to their friends and family. And I added a reflection paper to that, which was very short, a page about how they prepared to teach and how it was different than being a learner. And that actually was an assignment that they enjoyed a lot because they were able to pick the topic and they engaged with the content from a personal perspective of whatever interested them. I guess that could be an example of an essay. I am thinking, yeah. So.
Yeah, and it could be, that's a great example, and you could expand on it in different ways where it could be they create some lesson materials, or they actually they teach the lesson in person or on Zoom or something. There's ways you could expand on it, but yes, definitely that's a great one. Great example of how it can build relevance in students' brains. Because I mean, I hate to break it to you faculty, but students might be more interested in communicating with their friends than with us, maybe. I know, Kristen, I know, shocking, right? Shocking. But it's a great resource. Thank you for mentioning it. I was sort of aware of it, but I'm going to go look up that link. You said it was on AHA. Thank you. Thank you. Other examples or things you're considering, or maybe qualms you're having or hesitations about incorporating an essay?
I did a game project when I was very first on tenure track and was fearless and also really confused. You know, you're ready to try anything without like any thought about how to structure it. So that was not very successful. But what I didn't do is I didn't construct a rubric in advance and share it with the students about how it needed to link to course content. So what I ended up getting was some really great games that were factually wrong.
Yeah.
And it was hard to know how to grade them since I hadn't planned that in advance and I hadn't done the proposal, and maybe if I had done a couple updates along the way, I would have been able to catch those.
Right. Yeah, the scaffolding component. Thank you for sharing that. We learn so much from our mistakes, but it can be tough to share them. So thank you. I really appreciate that. And also I tend to underestimate or overestimate how enthusiasm for brand new things, not everybody shares that nerdy love for, hey, let's launch out and try something brand new. But in terms of the rubric and the actual grading and assessing, there's a lot of different strategies. I have had some good luck with in the very early stages when students put in their proposal to ask them to reflect and give some suggestions on how would you assess this then? What would make this an excellent project? What would make this a very good demonstration of this learning outcome or this skill? And as for their suggestions and input, and I've used a lot of what they suggest as well. And plus bonus, inevitably someone says, wow, this is really hard. How do you do this all the time? This is very gratifying.
I have a question or a little bit of a concern about using something like this. So what I've been entertaining doing is using this in my abnormal psychology class, which is it's a large class, but one of the final assignments that I have had them do is reflect on how they achieved a learning outcome that relates to human dimension and caring. So valuing social justice as it relates to mental health or understanding mental wellness. And it's been a written assignment in the past. And so the question is, for something like this, students would have the option to do an essay or the written assignment if they choose to just go the written route, right?
I've found that to be the most consistently successful.
Yeah. So then my question relates to, and this might get to something like the rubric, how to ensure equity in terms of the effort that students are putting. Like a student could sit down and write this reflection in 30 minutes. And then I could see another student doing a really intense creative project that might take far longer. And generally speaking, this assignment that I have done is most students earn full credit on this. This is a very low stakes assignment, but still a good one to get them to reflect on how they've evolved throughout the course. So one question that I had just for the group is just any issues with equity that you may have seen. And then the other aspect is content-wise, and this might just be specific to a class like mine, but I imagine with different departments, when students have the opportunity to do more creative outlets like this, which I absolutely love, it might open up the door to, I've talked with some folks like in creative writing where I already get a lot of disclosures about mental health and struggles that they've had, and how to ensure that I as a faculty am giving that the attention that it deserves. Right? If a student in an artistic expression or a poem or something like that has a pretty strong disclosure, it oftentimes comes in writing assignments pretty clear. But if it's something more abstract, I'd want to make sure that I didn't miss that, right? And didn't give it as much attention if I would have been giving it attention in a very explicit written assignment where I can deduce what's going on.
That's
loaded questions, but I'm just
that's a really good
curious
point.
How that has worked for other people.
So let me speak to it and then we'll open it up for other people's input. The first point about when you've got a relatively low stakes, more of a, if I'm getting this right, more of a reflective summary kind of assignment, you can kind of, you can, I guess I would say, nudge students by saying, you can complete this reflection in a written assignment or in an essay or non-traditional format, such as a short PowerPoint slide or a poem or something. So do you see what I mean? Like, so suggesting small, doable essay types. You don't have to say it has to be this. You could open it up, but kind of starting them out, planting the seed that it's this short written reflection or a short non-written reflection to kind of stack the odds that they'll be that they will be equitable in terms of workload. And I guess the only other point I would make about that is that I do think there's real value in the way that essays help build connections. So if I was in that situation and like, oh my God, the student spent so much time and effort on this, I would take it as the opportunity to really shower that student with a lot of really formative and encouraging feedback and believing, I mean, genuinely that is of real value to students, especially now. And that in my mind, that would maybe kind of just, if you sort of justify or show that, yes, the student maybe had to invest more hours in it, but their takeaway is going to be very meaningful to them and hopefully empower them and increase their learning in the next class. So commiserate in that way, if that's just my thoughts on it. But I'll open it up to other people too. And I haven't given enough thought to that disclosure piece, except that there's some language in my syllabus about that lists some campus resources, and also saying if you feel unsafe, this, I invite you to talk with me, but I don't say a guarantee that I'm not going to pass on information. I just like as an invitation. So setting up in other classes, but I haven't thought about how that might come out in an essay in a way that it wouldn't in written work. So I'll definitely, I think just content wise, like you said, depending on the discipline, but I'll open it up to other thoughts on this, on Emily's good points here.
So I didn't know if like, I'm gonna call on Maggie, like, cause I know Maggie, you've talked about in criminal justice classes, how there's some really tough discussions that might be had. And yeah, so my concern relates more to, if a student is writing about something, it's very clear to me what they're writing about, and I can write back to them in their assignment submission and address it. But if it's more of an abstract representation of their, the way the content has affected them in some way, I would just be concerned that it might go over my head, right? And
Well, I
I
just
might
thought
not-
of something.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please.
You could always ask them to include a short explanation or summary.
Gotcha. Yep, that's what I was
Right.
thinking. Just like
Yeah.
like if it's an artistic piece or something, a
Yeah.
description. Maybe it's just for me, but
Right, that's
yeah,
right.
okay,
Yeah.
I like that
Sorry,
approach.
but Maggie, other strategies.
Oh, well, it's, I guess, for, I guess when talking about kind of difficult discussions, we do kind of, in my class, we tend to, before we dive into those discussions, we talk about all of the things that could come up and all of the emotions that come with, talking about racism or sexism and so forth, and or any kind of violence and so forth. It's criminal justice class, so we tend to get into a lot of those kinds of talks, and so that might be another thing to mention, Emily, and like using a type of project like this is to say that things might come up, and just kind of acknowledging that head on before the on essays are created, so that way students are aware of that, and that they know that you're a mandatory reporter in different ways, and to let that all that information kind of inform their approach to.
Yeah.
So that
Almost
was
like a little bit of a content warning kind of
yeah.
heads up. Yeah, it's a good
Or in
idea.
general, if the class is going to focus on challenging issues like that, doing that right at the start of class,
Right.
because that won't come up just in the essays, that'll
Sure.
come up in
Right.
day-to-day discussions.
Yeah.
Right.
And setting an environment where people are comfortable in that framework, I think would be helpful in any case.
Yeah.
And if you've asked for, in the proposals, if you've asked for how will this be assessed, that might be a way to open up a discussion about that or flag those parts,
So I have a couple of questions, Jessamyn, just maybe they're technical. But you mentioned like when you're scaffolding this project that you have a proposal for the project. Do you do any other kinds of scaffolding?
Yeah, so I mean, depending on the class, for the ones I showed you, I believe for the intro level class, it was the proposal, and then I think just an individual conference, like to check in and see how your work's going on it. Oh, and then I finalized with the student the assessment mechanism I was going to use for them. And then they did the final one. And then of course you could add in the presentation or the gallery walk. For longer, like semester long, where the unessay is replacing the major research project, there's a lot more elements. So it would be a proposal, it would be and then deciding the assessment mechanisms. For research-based, I scaffold your list of sources that you've found, then a draft of your bibliography, then the actual annotated bibliography, progress reports, like very, very low stakes, but required. How is it going? Where are you finding challenges or difficulties? Where are you enjoying the work? What else have I done for scaffolding? And giving up some class real estate. So in the classes, doing a kind of check-in, depending on the size, you could actually ask everyone, how is the project going? What challenges have you found? What could we assist you with moving forward? You could also, depending on the class size, you could assign or sort them into work groups where they might still be completing their own individual projects, but assisting each other in finding sources, practicing. And then again, low stakes, like reporting back to me on an individual basis. Here is how my research project accountability group has helped me find sources, helped me practice the presentation, building in all those checks and balances, not adding a huge amount of grading work because they're all very low stakes or even required but not graded, but checking in regularly. So by the time I get the final one, there's not a whole bunch of problems I have to try to respond to. Maggie, does that give you some ideas?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And the other kind of follow-up question that you just sort of touched on is that, so you have a separate assessment for each student?
I have done that in the past, but you could also do, not every time. And sometimes I have the basic one, but I might add a couple elements for a student project if they have made a really good suggestion for how the work should be assessed. But the ones that I have on my website, those are ones I created ahead of time and distributed to students. So you could see some examples there of ways that I've assessed essay assignments. It would still require, even with the pre-made rubric, I would still need to give up a lot of time to go through it with students and really make sure they were understanding it, not just glancing at it the night before the final project was due.
Okay, I've got one more, and then I'll open it up to other people. So again, this is kind of selfish of me to ask because it's something that's required for my class, but my class being writing intensive as part of our department's writing plan, the sort of requirement to call it a writing intensive course is that there is a draft of some sort that students get feedback on, and there's an opportunity for revision. And so do you put any kind of revision opportunities into the essay?
You definitely could. I always do for all my research papers, or even for the essay. If you, as part of the essay, you could have an annotated bibliography for historians that could include primary and secondary sources. And that would definitely, I've learned I have to allow students, not even a draft, but first just a list of sources. So I can go through and say, nope, nope, nope. And then a revised list of sources, then a draft of the annotated bibliography, and then the final bibliography. And I'll say again that I do not want to recommend even one single thing that sounds like it's going to add to your stress and work. So what I'll say about doing like that kind of draft is that maybe if I timed out all the exact hours, maybe a few more hours with the scaffolding and the drafts, but the type of hours and the type of labor is different, because by the end, the highest stakes end product, I've already dealt with the biggest issues, and it's pretty clear, often my last final project, there's one criteria. Did you apply all my previous feedback? Yes, no, sort of. So I could see if you had a writing component to a bigger essay project, you could do it in stages.
And
but it is important to note there's departmental curriculum pressures on people. I'm not saying the essay is so much better than anything else you could do. You have to jeopardize your job and your standing with your colleagues to use it. Sorry, John, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you are going to do that final stage where you just see if people implemented the changes you requested, that's probably, for me, one of the most effective uses of anti-plagiarism software, because it will flag, if you do have an essay, it will flag everything that's different. It will find that copy in the database, and it will show you what parts are the same and what are different. And you only have to look at the sections that have changed and compare that to your comments. And it's a nice, effective way of just doing well, examining the changes.
Anyone have an idea for an essay that's just occurred to them or they'd already been kicking around? That you might want to use, or you could workshop it real quick with us. It's all right, still thinking. Well, if you have further questions, let me just put my email in the chat. You can certainly get in touch with me and run stuff by me. You could also find me on my website, geekypedagogy.com. I have always appreciate your feedback. So there's a form, Google form for the Center for Teaching Excellence for workshops. And I'll stick around for a few minutes. We're a few minutes early, which is the best time to be ending a workshop. But I'll stick around if you want to run anything by me or just chat a little bit more. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. And maybe I'll see you. I'm going to be Zooming in for a few other workshops today and tomorrow. John made them so irresistible. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. We really appreciate this.
Thanks, John.
I have a couple of things.
Yeah, of course.
I feel bad because I've been, kind of dominating. But
That's all right. This is our bonus time.
I'm really thinking I'm gonna, do this as like a term, project for my students next semester. And so I've been thinking about like a comic book, skits, poetry readings, step dances. I plan to give a lot of different options for students to think of, because at least I find that like if I just say think of something, they're like hardly ever able to.
No, they need a
figure
list.
that out. So and I was thinking about, I structure this class like a criminal justice policy analysis class. And so, we kind of take a historical approach and look at, the different social and political and cultural influences of criminal justice policy, and then kind of the consequences of that policy, and ultimately this determination of whether these policies are effective. And, I think that, I typically assign this research paper where students select a policy of their choice, and they have to ultimately answer the question of whether it's effective or not, and using research to, support their argument. And so, I was curious about the prompts that you give for, an essay. Like, do you, I saw the board game, and, there was the cookies, the compare and contrast kind of different political uprisings, right, in different time periods and so forth. So, do you give a sort of, prompt in which they can, kind of demonstrate, is it like always like a compare and contrast two different things?
Yeah,
or
so the assignment details for that class, that is on my sample assignments page. It's the American Promise essay. And in that intro class, Maggie, the prompt was pretty open-ended, because remember, you start with, what do you actually want to achieve? What do you want students to be able to do better? And in the intro history class, historians in the room know what I'm talking about. The intro history class, really one of my most important goals was to help students identify the relevance in their own life today of studying the past, like why they should are we still recording? Why they should care about the study of past events that seem really distant. So the unessay assignment was really just about helping each individual unique student identify some way that studying these past events had some intersection, impact, interest in their life. So that was pretty open-ended for that intro level class. For a more advanced class, you're right, the prompt needs to be more specific to the skill that they need to demonstrate that they can do. So if the skill in this case is be able to articulate why a policy is effective and back up what you're saying with research, then you would need to give that as a very, very clear prompt. And you could give them some examples of how they might be able to demonstrate they can do that besides a written essay. But I'd also ask them for their ideas. They might have ones that have not occurred to you. If you're not, I don't understand the TikTok thing. So it's very possible in the future, I'm going to have to learn how to use TikTok just because a student says, this is how I'm going to do my own essay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the prompt might include certain like benchmarks or a specific skill they need to be able to show. And also a lot of reassurances that it might take some thinking and why you want them to think about it in a different way and how that can empower them as learners, so they understand the why and the relevance of it. Anyone else want to pick my brain? Questions? I did officially dismiss you, so we're just hanging out now. Emily, thank you for that point about the disclosures. I hadn't thought of that, so well, I'll definitely keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's been on my mind. I mean, I deal with it every semester in the written formats, but just thinking about something that might not be as concrete, I would just want to make sure that I didn't do a disservice to a student by missing something and not having an opportunity to address it with them in some way.
Yeah. And I think you're right to be attentive to it. I think it's going to just those are going to keep increasing.
Yeah.
We're going to see more and more of that for sure. I'm just being aware of that.
You know, one thing I'd like to say is that, you know, when you read hundreds of students and papers, they're not all that memorable and they often start to sound the same. And I don't think many students will remember them. They're those sorts of disposable assignments that disappear after they're done. But when they create an unessay, it's a much more memorable experience for us, which makes it more interesting, but also for them. That I've had when I've done similar things at the program I taught in the Duke for about 15 years or so, and students will write to me about the projects they had done there because it was different than what they had done in their classes, and you know, that creativity they're bringing to it adds a little bit more of an emotional attachment to it, and I think it makes the whole project a little more memorable, which is not a bad thing for a learning experience.
Very much so. And you could even, John, that made me think you could even frame it. Sometimes I do this talking with seniors, history seniors, and suggesting that they do a non-traditional format for their big senior project. I say, this is something you can talk about in your job interview. You know, when they ask, what'd you do with your history degree? It will help you stand out from other applicants. So framing it as a professional skill as well. But I totally agree that it's more memorable. And I'll just share one anecdote from a student, very, very high achieving student, very, very hardworking student, actually the cookie baker. She told me, I kept working with her, and she told me like 2 semesters afterwards, she's like, you know, when I started that, I hated it so much. I thought it, and she hated it because it was so different. I hated it. And now it's my favorite assignment that I've ever done. So that was very in keeping with that learning curve.
Did they get bonus points for the bonus March cookie?
Yes.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. And please stay in touch. I hope I'll see you in some of the other workshops today and tomorrow.
And also in the reading group next fall, because we're again doing a joint reading group on Michelle Miller's new book. Teaching and Learning in the Age of Technology.
It's going to be good. Thanks, everybody. See you later.
Thank you.
John, do I just, I think I have the link, but just like zoom in for the the
Yep.
workshops I've signed up for. I think there's a link in when I signed up for it or
Yeah, in the calendar invite.
in the calendar. Great.
If you got a calendar, I
Yeah.
didn't look at the names, so you did get them. Okay, yeah, in the calendar invite, there should be a link.
Okay.
And
Sounds
thank you, this
good.
was great. I wish we had more people here, but I think we got people burned out from yesterday's.
John, oh my God, this is a really, really good turnout. Really, really good. I think we definitely have to talk about the morale problem here on campus. My
everywhere.
campus. That's-
Everywhere.
Yeah, well,
It was-
I think especially there's some issues, but and Maggie too, I'd love to pick your brain on it when we have a little more time. And we're not being recorded. I see we're still being recorded.
And we will stop the recording. I clicked on it, but